Start right now. All right, let's start. So I'm going to hand it over to George Albro, who's the co-chair of NYPAN, and is going to give a brief introduction of NYPAN and tell us a little bit more about what we do in this organization and, you know, the important work that we're up to.
Okay, thank you, Maria. My name is George Albro. Again, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm one of the co-chairs of NYPAN, and we're hosting this event. And I wish to welcome everyone to this important event.
Oh, sorry, George, please unmute yourself. Sorry. George, please unmute yourself.
Okay, did I just start?
Yeah, no, just keep going.
And
Okay.
adjust your screen, please.
So I want to welcome everyone to this event. It's hosted by NYPAN, and I usually start by talking a little bit about the history of NYPAN. I won't do that. I think everyone knows that we were, the supporters of Bernie Sanders' run in 2016, and we continued after that. I want to talk a little bit about what we do now. And a lot of that is in our committee work. So, for example, we have a very active health committee that has for years now campaigned for the New York Health Act in New York State for a single payer system of healthcare, which now is more relevant than anything else with the cuts that we anticipate on the federal level. Uh, we also have an environmental committee centered more upstate, and that's been active for several years. This event has been organized by the Global Justice Committee. And you may say, why does an organization that takes place in New York State have a Global Justice Committee? It's because NYPAN, we've always made the connection between what happens in foreign policy of our country and what happens in the United States. And as we know, now more than ever, and as this education will attempt to point out, the events in Gaza, in the Middle East, and everywhere else is affecting our own democracy very directly, and our own freedoms and our own budget and the like. We can't ignore it. So, well before the events of several years ago in the Middle East and in Gaza, we were advocating that we take a stand against AIPAC and about their interference in our elections. And some of our allies didn't think that was relevant. I think now that they do. And I'd like to commend the people in our Global Justice Committee who have spent a long time organizing this and other events that we've tried to put on, and have been very successful in making the connections that we think are important. So I invite all of you to get involved in NYPAN, get involved in our committee work, whether it's healthcare or the environment or global justice, and join one of our committees. But first, we need you to join NYPAN. And to that end, there is a link that will be in the chat where you can become a sustaining member. And I have to say that we do volunteer our work, but this event costs money. And usually we don't talk about money till the end of an event. But right now, we want to be able to put on more events like this. And we think, hopefully, that you'll agree with us that it's important. So, for example, this event is costing us with Zoom and Action Network and various other costs, and our one intrepid staff person, Maria, it's costing us something like $1,500. We want to continue this, and you could help us do that. And you could help us plan it by joining NYPAN. And today only, if you do become a sustainer at $10 a month, we will send you this handsome NYPAN t-shirt. Fresh off the press, it is a $25 value, and it could be yours for free if you join NYPAN tonight. This is not available in the stores, only here online. It's not a tote bag, but you can't wear a tote bag. So we think that this is a good deal. And you will not only have a handsome t-shirt, you will have the ability to educate the public about important issues like AIPAC's interference. So with that, I urge you to join us, become a member, become a sustainer, or even just make a contribution to help us continue. So I guess I'm going to turn it over to Catherine Levy, our moderator, who has a chair of our Global Justice Committee, who's done enormous work putting this together. Catherine?
Thank you, George. And thank you all so much for joining us. I know there is a lot going on tonight and this week, so I appreciate the interest in what I think is a very important subject. I'm going to begin with two activists who are going to be speaking with us, whom I admire enormously, Eva Borgwardt and Etan Mabourakh. I've worked with Etan in lobbying, and I think I haven't worked with Eva, but I've admired her work from afar for many years. Eva is an organizer on the Jewish left based in Brooklyn, who currently works with the wonderful group If Not Now. Etan is a Jewish American activist and the organizing manager at the National Iranian American Council. He's leading a national No War with Iran campaign, which I hope everybody joins, because a war with Iran would be disastrous. So welcome, Evan and Etan. I very much appreciate your joining us tonight. I'm going to begin with Eva. We talk about connecting the dots. I want to begin about talking about the network of interest groups who are affecting our policies in the Middle East and our basic civil rights at this point. So Eva, I presume many people in this meeting are somewhat aware of Project Esther, which is from the Heritage Foundation's blueprint for the Trump administration, Project 2025. But not everyone is. And I'd like you to explain what it is and how it's playing out at the moment, both in Congress and in the Trump administration.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks to NYPAN for having me. And yeah, so Project Esther, as you mentioned, is a comprehensive plan by the far-right Heritage Foundation to dismantle the civil liberties of all Americans, starting with the Palestinian rights movement. And it has one of the important things about Project Esther is that it is trying to do all of this in the name of fighting anti-Semitism. Or that's the claim, and yet the plan has no Jewish authors and is authored entirely by far-right Christian Zionists at the Heritage Foundation, the authors of Project 2025. And this is really important when we talk about connecting the dots, because it visibilizes the Christian Zionist arm of what we call the pro-war lobby, the constellation of organizations and interest groups, including Christian Zionists, including groups like AIPAC, and including war profiteers and weapons manufacturers, who are all trying to make sure that the US keeps sending unconditional military support to Israel, regardless of any human rights violations it commits, and to other countries committing human rights violations as well. And so Christian Zionists are often not as in the spotlight, especially during a Democratic administration. But right now, given that Donald Trump is in office, Mike Huckabee, who's famously a Christian Zionist and far-right white nationalist, is the ambassador to Israel. And Project Esther has been released, and it has been out there since the fall. This arm of the pro-war lobby is on full display. And Project Esther itself is basically the approach is to use the sort of counterterrorism and national security language to completely dismantle a lot of aspects of civil society. So they think that if they can label pro-Palestinian activists and organizations as Hamas supporting organizations and claim that there's sort of a shadowy network of these organizations that is, manufacturing support or engaging in support for Hamas in the U.S., that they can use U.S. counterterrorism and national security infrastructure and justification to take away 501c3 statuses of organizations, to deport student organizers, to basically dismantle what normally would be like constitutionally protected rights that people have. And this is, of course, connected to the broader goals of the Trump administration or any authoritarian regime. Their goals are to dismantle their political opposition. And the reason that they're using the Palestinian rights movement as a vehicle to do that is because they think that no one will stand up for Palestinian rights activists. There's also what's a little bit hopeful about how this is playing out in this moment is that so far they've been proven wrong. There are active battles about specific aspects of Project Esther that are happening in Congress and in the US more generally. We're seeing that Democratic lawmakers who are coming out more and more on the side of justice and shared safety for everyone. And we need to keep it that way. We're seeing, as an example, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which is an attempt to codify the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism into law. The IHRA is it's short for the International Holocaust Remembrance Association definition of anti-Semitism, and basically tries to define criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic in order to then criminalize pro-Palestinian activism as anti-Semitic hate speech or other things. And as Democratic lawmakers are seeing this play out in the form of Project Esther and this repressive agenda that the far right is pushing forward, there's actually less support for this in the Democratic Party than there used to be. And then organizations in the pro-war lobby are pushing back. So these are active sort of like battles that are being fought in Congress right now. And the same thing is happening with the nonprofit killer bill, which is this attempt to revoke 501c3 statuses of organizations. I feel like every week or every couple of days, it's like it's in the reconciliation bill for the overall budget. Trump's big, beautiful bill, the overall budget that is also going to devastate like all aspects of our communities and create more funding for things like policing and war and less funding for health and social services and everything that we need. The question of what they're basically trying to sneak the nonprofit killer bill into this legislation. So that's something that we're tracking. But the most important thing is that this agenda is responsive to how much pressure we can all generate. And so resistance against these different aspects of Project Esther's agenda is really crucial. And also being able to see all of this laid out as a comprehensive plan written by far-right Christian Zionists is a useful organizing tool for our movements to be able to say, like, they're claiming this is about anti-Semitism. This is not about Jewish safety. And in fact, Trump's anti-Semitic white nationalist regime are the ones advancing this plan, and the Heritage Foundation wrote it. And we should all take this as a really useful tool for our movements to be able to expand our coalitions and have a united front against these really, really dangerous aspects of the far-right agenda.
Well, that's hopeful that there's I didn't actually know that there was less support for the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, because here in New York City, our wonderful mayor has just signed an executive order, and he wants to codify that definition of anti-Semitism. So we're having a different sort of battle here. Is it true, Eva, that there are 10 million members of Christians United for Israel? That's a Christian group, something like that?
I think yeah, I'll check on it's something like 10 million members, and there are around 7 million Jews in the United States. So again, this is really it's really crucial to visibilize this this arm of the pro-war lobby and the role of Christian Zionists who you know, for their own reasons are trying to keep an ironclad relationship between the US and Israel.
Well, they want, we're all Jewish, so they want Etan and you and I to go to Israel, so we'll be there for the rapture, as we understand. So I don't want to die for them. That may seem silly. I mean, I guess the thing that's frustrating for me is that I know so many Jewish activists for Palestinian rights and for peace and for basic human rights, and we're sort of erased from a lot of the national narrative in the media, and people don't understand that there are these Christian Zionists who are really pushing this agenda. But I'm glad that you said something hopeful, and I believe that Etan may have something hopeful to say as well. You're seeing some glimmers of hope in your fight, are you not, Etan, as well?
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine and Ava. Good to see you. Yeah, I would say that we are seeing some glimmers of hope in the broad anti-war movement. Maybe not in you know, in Gaza right now, but certainly in the last few months in Yemen. The coalition that was calling for the U.S. to stop bombing Yemen. The U.S. had bombed a water treatment facility. We had bombed civilians. We had killed you know, scores and scores of people. And that has stopped due to a broad coalition of folks, Democrats and pro-restraint Republicans, I think, getting in the administration's ear and beating AIPAC arguments. And I think the vast majority of Americans, right, everyone, mostly when you talk to people, all stripes, backgrounds, ages, political persuasions, don't want the U.S. to continue wars. Trump ran on a mandate of ending the wars. And certainly a war with Iran is the next and current greatest threat. And you know, I can share a link to a political article just today of Mark Levine in the White House advocating for bombing Iran. This is now the fourth time reportedly that we can call it the AIPAC lobby, the pro-war with Iran lobby more broadly, because it's a lot bigger than just AIPAC, unfortunately, that has called for this. But Trump keeps saying no. And you know, if we want to put their arguments in some context, right? I would categorize sort of the pro-war arguments on this issue, and it mirrors other countries as well. But on Iran, and it's calling for maximum pressure sanctions. It's calling for Israeli-led, U.S.-backed strikes, and in some cases for outside-led regime change. And the Trump keeps bucking these calls. You know, amidst these demands, the talks have continued. There's still grappling over enrichment versus weaponization. Israel calling for what some people describe as the Libya model, full giving up the entire enrichment program. And Iran seems unwilling to do that. But I'm happy to get into some as well.
So the thing that's frustrated me, and I'd like to address this to both of you. I think somebody has to mute themselves. Or Maria, can you mute everybody's and only unmute them when they're ready to ask a question or something. What's frustrated me is that we often go into lobbying meetings. I've been in lobbying meetings with you, Etan, and we present various facts to legislators, often Democratic legislators and their staffs. And we present polls that show that the American people do not want war with Iran. They want a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. They want humanitarian aid to enter Gaza. And then we're met with a line of AIPAC talking points. And the question I want to ask both of you is, do you think that the staffs of these legislators and the legislators themselves are actually unaware of how unpopular their positions are, or are just being willfully blind because they just want to serve their donors, and in the case of APAC and related groups. I'll start with you, Eva.
Sorry, 1 second. Could you go to Etan, actually?
Okay, I'll start with Etan then.
Yeah, I'll take, I guess, the more optimistic argument here, because I think in these spaces we can doomsday it up a bit. Personally, I know that some members of Schumer staff are former APAC staff, and that kind of relationship exists all across the Hill. I don't think it's as nefarious of a relationship in the minds of those individuals. I think it's a relationship of convenience, and our side can continue to do a job of applying the pressure and the political costs. I think with Schumer specifically, that's a challenge in the Senate. That's supporting progressives. That's supporting young Democrats. That's providing political space for meaningful opposition. But those folks, those staff, we also need to give political rewards as well. In addition to the pressure, we have to show up in the institutions that we may despise with a hand extended, to do a press conference together, to share materials, to repeatedly bug them about polling and up-to-date information, because it all shakes out on Iran. I mean, for example, there was a recent poll by University of Maryland, found vast majority of voters, I believe, above 70% of Democrats, 68% of voters, 64% of Republicans all support negotiations over a war with Iran. Catherine, I know we've talked about a poll that Democrats and vast voters are flipping on broad support for Israel. These are things, as Schumer, who's contended to be, someone whose chief concern is keeping the left pro-Israel, he should want to lean into this kind of engagement, even in that sense. So, we should show up all over the place. We should have folks who play the good cops and the bad cops, who can show up and protest and guilt, and others who can be like, oh, maybe I can inform them and educate them and show them to the Israeli refusers networks and groups like Breaking the Silence, and If Not Now, and and others that are really, I think, pushing the narrative. And groups like ours, if I can go on, frankly, like it is a bubble on the Hill. It is, it's unreasonable to all of us as voters, that we should support our tax dollars going to launch an Israeli-led regime change effort in Iran. But on the Hill, when they're only hearing from folks who are members of monarchist Iranian lobbies or MEK cult lobbies, or hearing from the title of this session is Connecting the Dots. It's the CEO of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt. His wife sits on the board of the Iranian monarchist lobby, the personal lobby for the son of the deposed Shah, and who has met with Netanyahu, who has aligned himself with groups like FDD, who are deeply, I think, entrenched in the weapons manufacturing and pro-war and military-industrial complex. Those alliances, that's who they hear from. They hear those arguments. So it's incumbent upon us to show up in those same spaces, frankly, as disgusted as we may be by the principles, and cycles that those groups reinforce. We have to show up, and I like to presume, incompetence, willful ignorance over nefarious intent. Maybe the staffers tell themselves that is what I like to say to myself.
So I might just switch my question to you, Eva. We fortunately have been joined by a great advocate for peace and justice, Jamaal Bowman. But before I ask him questions, I want to just talk to you about the ADL, a particular bête noire of mine. And I didn't actually know about that connection with the Iranian group until Etan told me about it. But could you just talk about the role that the ADL, which many people think of as a great civil rights group, right? The role that they're playing in promulgating this notion that all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, etc.
Yeah, so the ADL currently led by Jonathan Greenblatt, has a reputation that we hope is and we are organizing to change. That it's an organization that fights for civil rights and specifically against anti-Semitism. But we're seeing that, especially in the first months of this administration and continuing on, that the ADL has been on a trajectory where the two parts of the organization's mission, the first, which is to protect civil rights and fight anti-Semitism, and the second, which is to defend the state of Israel at all costs and preserve unconditional U.S. support for the state of Israel, are in deep contradiction with each other. And so in order to defend the state of Israel in U.S. public opinion, they are increasingly supporting measures that undermine the other part of their mission. So undermine the fight against anti-Semitism, or actually condone make bedfellows with people who are doing extremely anti-Semitic things. We saw them excuse Elon Musk's Hitler salute as an awkward gesture, and they have been for this entire past year and are continuing to emphasize that student protesters are the greatest threat to Jewish safety and to Americans' safety in general, more than the far right white nationalists who are in the actual Trump administration. And that makes them actually enablers of the anti-Semites in the administration, and it means that they're undermining safety for Jews, which is their purported mission. So now is the time for organizations to stop working with the ADL, and we really want to encourage folks to seek out alternative ways to protect Jewish safety and protect the safety for all people. And when in doubt, if something is advancing safety for one group of people at the expense of safety for another, that's not true safety. And the ADL for years has tried to claim the opposite, and now we're calling their bluff. And it's playing out in a much more dramatic way than it has previously.
Right. I mean, I think that October 7th, 2023 and its aftermath has exacerbated everything, but these are diseases that have been festering for a long time, as all of us know. Speaking of which, we have our great former Congressman Jamaal Bowman with us. Can you put him on the screen? Thank you so much, Congressman Bowman, for joining us. I'm not going to give you much of an introduction because I know that you don't have much patience with those things, and anyway, you don't need an introduction. But I just want to say that you're one of my heroes. Those of us at NYPAN fought for you when you first ran. We fought very hard in 2024 and took a lot of abuse from people. And that was a terrible experience of AIPAC's power in our electoral politics. So nobody is better to speak about this than you. Etan and Eva and I have been talking about the manifestations of the power of AIPAC, but you have the lived experience of having been in Congress and seen what pressure they put on people every day. Could you talk about that a bit? Because I don't think people are very aware of that.
Yeah, so first of all, good evening. Good to be on with you. Thank you so much for having me. Good to see everyone, and thank you all for your support over the years since 2020, and thank you for fighting with me and us fighting collectively in 2024. We lost that battle, but I think it was a righteous fight, and I think it did a lot to inform the community as to who AIPAC is. One time I was coming out the gym recently, and my gym is on the at the intersection of Pelham and the Bronx. And so I'm coming out the gym, and this a black dude, maybe in his late 30s, turns to me and says, "You started a revolution." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, your race, AIPAC, you started your revolution. Now everybody knows, right? So I guess no one knew, I don't want to say no one, but certain communities didn't know, they weren't aware of the impact of this particular lobby. And so, in that way, it was an important fight and a righteous fight. And it was a fight we were supposed to have as we stood up for Palestinian human rights, as we've always done, and as we always fight for the rights of all people. A couple things. One, so the the way AIPAC is entrenched in Congress, as we know, didn't start last year or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It started like 60 years ago, right? Like they're lobbying in Washington and the work they've been doing there. In my race, many of you may not know this part. So when as a candidate, like before I even became publicly viable, before COVID hit, so this was still 2019, AIPAC reached out to me to have a meeting as a candidate. And so, and they did it through they knew that racial justice was a part of my platform. So they did it through the prism of 100 Black Men, which is a well-regarded organization in the Black community. Well-regarded, well-respected. Many prominent Black leaders are a part of 100 Black Men. And the at the time, the executive director was a part of 100 Black Men, was also a member of AIPAC, this Black guy. And so they reached out to me through him, because at the time I wasn't going to take any meetings with AIPAC, and I've never taken a formal meeting with AIPAC. So they reached out through him. And I told him, I'll meet with you to discuss 100 Black Men and you'll work there, but I don't want to talk about AIPAC. He was like, fine, we could meet and talk about 100 Black Men. And we did, but he still came with like a bag and a package from AIPAC. So it starts there. It starts with candidates, right? So they are monitoring races all over the country that they care about. Obviously, in 2020, I'm running against Elliot Engel, so of course they care about that. I'm running in Westchester County, of course they care about that, right? So they were plugged in, or tried to be plugged in from the very, very beginning. So that's one thing I wanted to share. Sorry. So another thing is, when I got into office, I was very outspoken around things that were happening with Palestinians. And so one of the things I tweeted about, I think I wrote to the Israeli embassy about, was the lack of vaccines that were being provided to Palestinians in the West Bank. And so, I wrote that letter, and immediately Twitter goes crazy, and the Israeli embassy wants to have a meeting with me, and I go there to the meeting. And again, this is all part of beginning the process of building the relationship and getting me to kind of like, see their perspective on things. But the biggest thing that happened when I first got in was I co-sponsored Betty McCollum's bill that called that wanted to have an accounting from Israel as to how our $3.8 billion a year was being spent. We wanted to ensure that it was not being spent on detaining children unlawfully. And as soon as I co-sponsored that bill, over 1,000 calls and emails came into my office, and I'm not exaggerating, by the way. And there was a protest outside of my Mount Vernon office with protesters and signs and an Israeli flag. The emails that came in were using language that I've never read on digitally or in text. Language like blood libel, I didn't know what that was, and other like super scary language that like gave me pause, like, oh, like what the hell is this? Like what did I trigger? And for me at that time, a couple things. One, I was always very conscious of this, always, because I was aware of the sort of rhetoric around Israel and propaganda around it. so I was always careful because I didn't want my criticism of Israel to be perceived as anti-Semitic, not because I was worried about being called anti-Semitic. I didn't want others to think that it was okay to not like Jewish people because I criticized Israel. So I was always very careful, try to be very careful of this. And so when I was reading emails about blood libels and all of that, I was like, well, let me take a step back because I don't want to get, send the wrong messages here. But when your office is inundated with those kind of calls and emails, and there's that kind of infrastructure in place, and then of course social media was being killed, your office can't function. Like you can't do your job. You can't meet the needs of your constituents. If someone has an immigration issue, a social security issue, a housing issue, your work has to stop. And your staff is not prepared for that. So it's the member gets the heat, but the staff has to deal with it in real time. They answer the phones, they respond to the emails, they have to call back. And it's overwhelming. Like it's overwhelming. And so members don't want to deal with that, right? Like they don't want to deal with being attacked. They don't want to deal with being overwhelmed. They don't want to deal with being called anti-Semitic. And then many of them also, in terms of just what we were all educated with Western education system, right? Israel has a right to exist, it has a right to defend itself. The Arab countries should take in the Arab neighbors. All of that is part of our collective education, and it's part of the collective education of the members of Congress. Now, that is inexcusable in my opinion, because members of Congress should be much more informed on all the issues and should, to me, when you take that oath to protect the Constitution, that Constitution represents our values as a democracy, and our values as a democracy do not support an apartheid state. It just doesn't support that. But like what I learned in Congress is, and you probably all know this, and it's common sense now, or it's always been common sense, is, especially in the House, where it's every 2 years, people just focus on being reelected. And so because their goal is to be reelected, right, you want to rock the boat as little as possible. And AIPAC has the resources and the infrastructure, and they're organized to make your life very difficult in Congress, where you can't even concentrate on anything else. And so even before October 7th, especially in this district, I consistently had to, and I'll use this term, even though, it may sound like hyperbole, but I felt like I consistently had to bend the knee. I consistently had to acquiesce to how they wanted me to behave, how they wanted me to talk about Israel, what they wanted me to say and not say. I could never say, definitely couldn't say apartheid. They barely wanted me to say occupation, right? Even though it's clear as day, it's an illegal military occupation, right? So that's just what it's like to be in Congress. And then again, if you play ball like Richie Torres, for example, you're going to have $10 million in the bank, prepared for every reelection, and you can have aspirations to run for governor. And let me just say a little bit about that. So fundraising is very hard in general. It's even harder for progressives who don't take corporate PAC money. And so in Washington, you go to vote and then you go raise funds. That's all you do, right? And then when you're home, you may go to an event at home and then you go into fundraisers because you're constantly raising money. If you're Richie Torres or someone like him, you could just tweet nice things about Israel and use every talking point, and you don't got to pick up a phone to raise money. The money's going to be there. I mean, George Latimer wasn't dialing for dollars when he ran against me. that was there not only for his campaign, but also for his there were IEs. You all are familiar with super PACs and independent expenditures, all that. So there were IEs. Most of the commercials came from the IEs against me, which took the number to like 23 million overall when it was all said and done. And then in terms of the race, and I'll stop here, it was so first of all, coming home to like 15 mailers in your mailbox, right? And like 13 of them would be against you and 12 will be for you, right? And so my name recognition is through the roof right now. You know what I mean? Everywhere I go in New York State, they're like, oh, especially New York City, Jamaal Bowman, oh shit, what's going on? So it's great for your name rec. But yeah, it was, I remember coming home one day and just going in the mail. I'm like, this is insane. And I just spread all the mailers out. I'll send you the picture if I can find it, and took a picture, sent it to my team. I'm like, this is what I'm coming home to. And then literally every channel we turned to on the television was an ad. And it wasn't like 2 weeks out or 1 week out. It was like 10 weeks out they started these ads. Everywhere you went digitally, there was an ad. My daughter, who's on YouTube way too much, first thing she said was at the end of the race was, at least I don't got to see the ads anymore, because she's seeing the ads against her dad constantly, right? And you know, and then there was this other IE that it was a black led IE, because you know, again, go just bring it full circle. You know, you got they engage black leaders to criticize other, you know, black representatives or electeds, so they're not called racist. So it's coming from other black people. So there was this black van driving around the Bronx with my face on it, trying to imagine this. For those of you who know me and know my work, imagine trying to get this over. Black van, my face on it, looking angry, right? And the van says something like, Jamaal doesn't care about gun violence, right? That was what they were trying to sell to black voters in the district from black people, which didn't work. I won 85% of the vote in the Bronx. But yeah, man, and then finally, again, because of this district, and I keep emphasizing that because there are districts all over the country where members don't have to deal with what I have to deal with in Westchester County, New York. Like White Plains, Scarsdale, Rye, Mamaroneck,
New Rochelle.
the river towns, New Rochelle, and then I had Riverdale before. But there's this, and this is New York State, right? So you're not going to see a concentration like that in any district in the country. I think Summer mentioned maybe hers in Pittsburgh, but because of that, not just their attacks on me, their infrastructure with local elected officials, right? So Andrea Stewart Cousins, the Senate Majority Leader, claws into her, right? Ken Jenkins manipulated the entire redistricting process against his own party for them, right? People like Shelley Mayer, right? Other like local electeds, they wouldn't touch this race. Many people who you don't even know their names were not going to endorse me because they didn't want to, you know, be affiliated with me, right? Because they support me, but you know, I became, I don't know what to forget the word, but like you couldn't touch me, right? It was like stay away from Jamaal. And that's why I give so much respect to and love to those who did endorse, because I know what they're, you know, it took a lot of courage to endorse me during that time. And so elected officials become choked off and suffocated in terms of serving constituents and actually upholding the values of a democracy. It's really, really, really sad. And then like, you know, the question of why we can't have nice things, right? Is because of AIPAC and other lobbies, you know? It's like because their interests are the most important interests. You know, I mean, look, you probably saw the mayoral debate last week when they asked the question and like I don't even know the word, but it's so gross. Like, I'm going to the Holy Land. I'm going to Israel. You know, I'm going to Israel to fight anti-Semitism. You could fight anti-Semitism in 10,000 ways right here in New York. You don't have to go to Israel to do that. And then the Jewish community is not a monolith. And they, you know, if you're JVP, or if you're If Not Now, or if you're, you know, Ben the Ark, or if you're, you know, Americans for Peace Now, it's like y'all are Uncle Tom Jews. And I'm saying that because I've heard people say that, right? Um, and so it's just really gross and disgusting. And yeah, that fight, you know, it took you know, when you're going through it, you're putting on a strong face, and I still put on a strong face, but it was enduring. You know, it took a lot out of me. And you know, the way I deal with those things is I go lift weights. I go to the gym and I lift a lot of weights, so it's helpful. But it's still it's a lot, man. And um, so yeah, I'll stop there and take questions. But that's kind of like how it works, and I'm very scared, just to be honest with you, about like to have, and I assume most of us are Democrats here, you know, some of us may be socialists or communists or something, but to have like Hakeem Jeffries, right, leader of the Democratic Party, not show any leadership on this issue, it's really scary because there's a very simple way to show leadership if you're Hakeem Jeffries, in my opinion, right? We support this, even if from Hakeem Jeffries' perspective, right? Let's say this is him. We've always supported the state of Israel and its right to exist and defend itself. But what has happened in Gaza has gone too far, and we cannot support that. In order to sustain the long-term safety of the people of Israel, we have to pivot and reverse course. The way things have been there are wrong, and we have to do things right. Palestinian self-determination and safety is as critical as important as Israeli self-determination and safety. We can have both and fight anti-Semitism at the same time. I just gave you a 30-second example of the leadership Hakeem Jeffries can show that would actually be better for what they want the state of Israel to be. And he has not shown it. And no one in the Democratic Party is showing it. And the candidates that we're talking about for president 2028, I don't think they're going to show it either. Like, I don't think Newsom's going to show it, or Buttigieg, or Westmore, or any of them. And
No.
so that's what's so scary, because that was so frustrating about being in Congress, which between us, I don't miss it. I really don't. I love New York. I love being back in New York. Zoran's race is exciting. I'm helping with that. There's other stuff going on. I'm happy to be back in New York. But what is so disgusting about Washington is that we inhumanity is become a standard in our policy as it relates to Palestine. And then lack of integrity and dishonesty has become the standard as it relates to our overall politics. We lie to ourselves, and or we don't care about every human life equally. And I just cannot stomach that personally.
I mean, you've just demonstrated why so many of us fought so hard for you, because we need your voice in the Congress, although you're speaking very effectively outside of the Congress and in the context of the New York City race. I'd love for you to stay on if you'd be willing to. We're going to be joined by Sarahana Shrestha, who is a wonderful member of the New York State Legislature and who was a co-sponsor of the Not on Our Dime bill. You know, she's showing the same sort of courage in the legislature that you showed in the Congress. So
yeah, I'm going to stay on the listen. I just want to say one thing to this group. And NYPAN, I know you all do really, really incredible work, and please keep doing that work. I would love to have a follow-up conversation around, so what does organizing look like in this moment, where AIPAC is really entrenching its power even further and more publicly, and Trump is deploying Marines to LA, right? And all the stuff that's happening, and just like everything I just gave one little 20-minute speech or whatever. I learned a lot, and I want to share more of my learning and my thinking around how we could organize in this moment. So I want to continue to be in community because I don't know what it looks like, but we got to figure out how to hold these elected officials more accountable. And I mean people like Carl Hasty, Andrea Stewart Cousins, and many others, who by the way aren't ready for prime time in terms of criticism. They are weak. They could not deal with 1/100th of what I deal with. So anyway, I will turn the camera off and listen. But thank you again for having me.
Well, no, don't turn the camera off. We
Well, I
miss
gotta
you.
travel. I gotta travel. So I'm going to a Westpac. Anybody in Westchester?
Yeah, well, Harry
There's
is
a
in
Westpac event tonight, so I'm going
Oh,
to that.
okay.
But I'll turn it back on when I get in the lift.
Love
Okay,
Canada.
but we really want to talk about how to change our strategy and how to change this whole dynamic, because the fate of democracy is wrapped up in it. We all believe that. So we want to
Yeah,
have.
I'll just say two things, and then I want to let Sarahana go. I hope I said the name right. Two things. One, and this is giving me life again. Uh, Not that I was dead, I always had life, but this is like reinvigorating me. Focusing hyper locally. So focusing hyper locally on like Yonkers and the Bronx and New York. I really love that. I've been really, it's been really helpful. So I'm connecting on a personal level, but also with groups like organizations and their work. So that's really important, I think. And then coalitions. Like we really need to be in coalition more strategically with this stuff, hyper locally and then nationally. But we could talk more about that. I'll listen. I'll turn the camera off. I promise I'll turn it back on.
You need to join us again, Congressman, because
Yes.
we need to have a deep dive into that very subject, in my opinion. Thank you so much. But turn your camera back on wherever you go. We want to see you. I'm just going to introduce Sarahana. I'm sorry for the delay. I know it was difficult for you to join us here tonight. Sarahana Shrestha represents Assembly District 103 in the Mid-Hudson Valley and believes basic needs like healthcare, energy, affordable housing, and education should be public goods designed to maximize our well-being rather than profits. She is the first Nepali American state legislator elected in the state of New York. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. I know this is a heavy-duty night in the legislature, but the congressman was talking about the terrible pressures he was under in the Congress. And I was wondering if you could talk about whether you're under those similar pressures from the Israel lobby in the legislature and in your elections. I know that you had to fight in your last election against somebody who was backed by, I presume, Solidarity PAC. Was that who she was backed by?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm very excited to be here. I just want everybody to know, first of all, that I have a viral Jamaal Bowman tweet. So that's one of my accomplishments. But anyway, I represent Mid-Hudson Valley. And, yes, so what these groups do is they exploit whatever primary might be happening to take out who they want to take out. And it's not really about supporting our opponents. It's more about opposing us. So yes, I did have a primary, very well-spent primary challenge against me last year. And, she really did not have any connections to Solidarity PAC. But when they saw that this was happening, that's where that PAC spent their money.
So you courageously are one of the co-sponsors of a piece of legislation that I love, the Not on Our Dime legislation. Did you pause before co-sponsoring that legislation?
No.
Did you feel that it was going to be too dangerous a thing to do?
No, I did not pause. I was the first person to sign on. And the reason is, my seat has been earned. People have sent me here. People have knocked doors to send me here. People have donated to send me here because they want me to do what is not always comfortable, what is not always convenient. And that's the reason, in a very sprawly rural district, we knocked over 32,000 doors, and people, paused their jobs to knock doors. People broke their cars to knock doors. And I see some people here that knock doors for me. And that is because people feel like they have a stake in this seat. Yes, politicians technically you know, have a seat and so on. But really what we're trying to do here, running as a movement candidate, is that this seat belongs to more than one person, right? So whatever movement that we are being backed by that sent us to office, we really have to take that responsibility seriously. I have happened to be very fortunate to be in a district that is very progressive, where people appreciate me taking risks, whether it is against APAC or you know, against the real estate industry, against the fossil fuel industry. And that's what we're here for, because if we're not willing to do that, we might as well just take another cushy job that pays more money, to be honest.
I mean, I think that's a great attitude. Could you talk a bit about, I know that Seth Pollack, who's going to join us in a moment, or he could be put on the screen here since he's one of our speakers. Could you talk about that convergence of these various interests? Because we're seeing it happening in the New York City races right now, that the real estate interests, DoorDash, you know, I never thought that much about DoorDash before, but Uber and the pro-Israel lobby are all joining together to defeat the progressives. And that happened to some degree, the attempt happened to some degree in your district as well, did it not?
Yes. So, you know, by progressive candidates like us truly being committed to representing the people that we want to represent, so we are the great unifier of all of those industries and lobbies, right? What they have in common is that they hate us and they want to take us out. So that's how they all come together. And I just want to, you know, point out one thing, which is, of course, the root of the problem are two things. One is, you know, our democracy functions in a way where we are constantly thinking about being re-elected, right? We should not be thinking about being reelected once the election has happened. We should really be thinking about, like, what is our job? What is our responsibility? And none of these responsibilities hinge upon taking very safe positions. I mean, we have so many lobbies and you know, powerful sectors that are opposed to us, you know, billionaires that are opposed to us, that of course going up against them is going to be exposing yourself to challenges. So my personal philosophy is to take those positions and then to work our butts off to win those elections. And I do want to say, you know, one thing that is very evident is the smaller the race, it is, well, actually, you know, when you start with very small races, like, for example, City of Kingston Council seat, or, you know, a town board seat, those are very difficult because of how small it is. But once you get to, like, the state legislature positions, those are almost the ideal size for us to be able to defeat money with grassroots efforts. But when you go bigger, you know, for example, Congressman Bowman's district, it becomes increasingly difficult with scale, but also we saw that the scale of the money was also insane, right? It was so many times multiplied compared to how much was spent against me. But then when you look at somebody like Zoran, who's you know, running for New York City mayor, turns out that is also sort of an ideal size if you have lots of people knocking doors for us, where you can go up against somebody like Andrew Cuomo and use the public finance laws that we have, which is the second thing, right? We really need good public finance laws for all positions of elected offices. But when you have the combination of public finance and when you have the combination of a city where lots of people can show up to knock doors and actually have one-on-one conversations with voters, there is a limit to how far money can go. But then we saw in the case of Congressman Bowman's district, what they went after wasn't even the explicit topic of Israel-Palestine. They went after his votes. And that was a very illuminating lesson on, you know, people are not really following the ins and outs of, you know, why a certain vote was taken, et cetera. For me, my opponent really did not mention Israel or Palestine. She went after my budget, no vote. So we also see that there is so much political education to be done with people you represent so that they know why you took certain actions that you did. But that does become difficult when it's a congressional seat, just because, you know, it's a much bigger scale, and it becomes more difficult to defend. But I think the winning combination is to take your positions, be strategic, you know, always be strategic. Don't open yourselves to like unplanned attacks and so on, and be ready to defend your position by really going all out and campaigning very, very hard.
So is there any way, somebody is asking in the chat, if there's any way that we can go on the offensive? I mean, you're partly talking about that, but can we be more proactive in educating people? Would it require year-round canvassing, for instance?
I absolutely think this ongoing year after year organizing is important for topics like this, because the truth is most people don't know. Most people don't know the influence of how much money is spent on these campaigns. And just because people are suspicious and sort of cynical about how much money is spent doesn't necessarily mean they know what they can do to counter it. You know, one of the things I did in my campaign was, when all these mailers were being spent against me, I did one mailer simply spelling out who was powering the opposition against me, and it was all real estate interests, you know, so that instantly made people suspicious of things that were being said about me. And I also made myself very available to answer questions like, why did I vote no on the budget? Because I was being accused of voting against tenant protections when it was the opposite. You know, the tenant protections were quite, you know, sort of didn't go the full direction that we wanted in the end, which is why we took this vote. So it is very important to closely communicate with your constituents all year around. And this applies to everything. When we pass controversial bills, we need to explain why we supported it, because every bill can inspire opposition that sounds compelling, but we all know that the opposition spends money on things that rely on fear, things that rely on division and suspicion of each other. So, you know, that's what we're going up against. So we cannot take it for granted how much we need to be talking with the people that we represent.
You know, I think that Congressman Bowman is right. We really need to have another session that we have as a deep dive into how we can really go on the offense and save our democracy, because there's so many principled people still in office, or who have left office, or who are supporting people in office who have ideas about doing this. I'm just going to introduce somebody who's joined us, because I'd be interested in having a back and forth between people here. Two people who've joined us. The first person who joined us was Seth Pollack. He's a JFREJ member and a political organizer based in South Slope, Brooklyn. He previously served as Director of Advocacy for Housing Works and as an Intergovernmental Affairs Specialist at FEMA. And Yuh-Line Niou, terrific activist, and I think friend. She's a lifelong Democrat and progressive leader for low-income immigrant and working families. For 6 years, she served as a member of the New York State Assembly for the 65th District, representing a great area: Chinatown, the Financial District, Battery Park City, and the Lower East Side. And in 2022, she was a candidate for Congress in the 10th Congressional District. And she's a co-founder and partner at Outlier Strategies. It's a values-based policy consulting firm. So I'd be interested in whether you, Yuh-Line, and you, Seth, have any questions for Sarahana, who's in the thick of the battle there in the post-October 7th, 2023 world, about what challenges she's facing. Any questions?
I think Seth is still not unmuted.
Seth?
Oh, there he is.
I was just reserving comment because I hope I never again in my life need to follow Jamaal Bowman in any sort of speaking order.
He's awesome.
I just thanks so much, Catherine, for putting this on and for inviting me to represent JFREJ. I guess I just really wanted to go back to a question that was asked, that John asked in the chat, which is, you know, is it possible for us ever to be the proactive ones and not to feel so much on the back foot? And I would argue that that's actually exactly what's happened, that the progressive movement's ascendancy in New York, starting with candidates like Yuh-Line and kind of followed up with Sarahana and others who have taken office in the state legislature and changed its face dramatically, like generational change just since 2019. Like that's actually what has inspired this very recent, very powerful alliance between big business interests and the pro-war lobby to get involved in these local races. So I think everyone on this call, you've all taken part. We've made this happen. We've started doing things, getting enormous protections for tenants, climate protections, reproduct, like these are the things that have motivated that what a previous speaker called this like marriage of convenience between the corporate interests and the folks, the Jewish voters who are whose, fears are being exploited to help subsidize these, repressive campaigns. So I realize it's kind of not much consolation to say we're already doing it, but we are. And so I don't want us to feel more discouraged than we need to.
I think we're already doing it.
Here, 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 here. I want to. I'm sorry. I just wanted to uplift. Who was that? That was Seth. That was Seth.
That
Who
was
just
Seth.
said that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Seth. That was awesome, man. I really appreciate you saying that because remember, and I'll be quick. I was a middle school principal, right? And I opened my school in 2009. And that was like Occupy Wall Street, and then Black Lives Matter, and then Bernie Sanders, and then the Squad in 2018, and then Yuh-Line and Biaggi and beating the IDC in 2019. All of that inspired me to.
Babe, I was 2017.
Oh yeah, 2017. Thank you very much. But all of that inspired me to run for Congress in 2020. Right? Like all of that happening. I'm like, okay, this is movement shit happening now. I can do this. I didn't want to do the Adam Schiff politics. No offense to him. I wanted to do the Yuh-Line, Squad, Bernie, BLM, Occupy politics, right? So Seth, you're absolutely right. This is why they're doing what they're doing.
But we have to find a way to fight it. And I believe, Congressman Bowman, and you showed this when you were in Congress, the way to fight it is to be tougher and more outspoken and really raise your voice. So Yuh-Line, when you ran for Congress, I loved you anyway before you did this, but you came out for BDS. And I think that you paved a path for other people. I think you paved a path for Zoran right now by doing that. And I know it was a difficult thing to do. Can you talk about that experience of coming out for BDS? I mean, it made me more excited, but I'm sure that wasn't true of everyone, right?
Sure. Yeah, it wasn't true for everyone, but I think for me, it was just like Sarahana said, and like what Jamaal Bowman was saying. It's like if you have to fight for what you believe in, and otherwise, why are you here, right? Why are you running for office? Why are you fighting for, like, what are you doing here? It's not for any other reason except to represent the people of your district and to fight for the things that you believe in, right? And I think, and this I think goes to what Sarahana was talking about when it comes to fighting locally and then changing for the progressive movement. It's like, I've never changed as a person. I never changed as a person. I always had the same opinions about certain things, of course, like, learning about things, like you can evolve your thinking. And I will say, I grew up in the Jewish community. I also, I'm so close to the Jewish community that I had my inauguration at the Holocaust Museum, that I literally had rabbis come and bless my office. Like, it was, I've never changed as a person. People supported me from the communities. And then, but then when I think, and by the way, Cuomo is somebody, speaking of, Cuomo is somebody who actually wanted folks to pass legislation to make it illegal to actually boycott, divest, and sanction anything, like to literally not stop. Like, who can help businesses that way to the point of where they can make it illegal if you don't partake in these kinds of, to partake in some corporate entity. It doesn't, I mean, we can vote for it with our wallets, like this is something in America that if you're a capitalist society, I guess, in which we are, like, make it so like we can vote with our wallets, and that's.
I'm sorry to interrupt. He signed an executive order against.
He signed an executive order. He wanted
yeah.
legislation passed. The legislature ended up not doing it, but it was just like, this is something that he actually, tried to make illegal in New York, but obviously it's unconstitutional, right? It's not something that's constitutional sound. So like he's somebody who has done things like that. And as a legislator, there are things that, I never touched on the federal level before, because obviously on the state level, we are local, and yet, like Sarahana said, like and which Jamaal also talked about, the influence starts very early. People will probably know that, like, legislators go on trips, and are asked to go on certain junkets, I guess. I myself have never gone on any of these trips because I'm very much like, I'm staying in my district. In fact, if I have to go past 14th Street, like I was like, I need a passport to go to past 14th Street because that's not my district. I was very, very much like in my district at all times, unless I was in Albany. And so I think it's really important for us to like kind of talk about how, Sarahana was very right. Like when you are running locally, you can make a huge impact. You can make a huge wave by just getting the folks locally to vote for you. Like, and it's really hard for anybody to turn away from who they know, and when you're running for a larger race congressionally, you don't get a chance to communicate with everyone the way that you would for a local race.
I want to ask both you and Sarahana a question that really troubles me. So Seth and Etan and I are Jewish, and so we're somewhat inoculated against charges of anti-Semitism, although they do call us things like self-hating Jews and worse things that I don't want to mention to you. And I wonder, you and Sarahana, you and Yuh-Line are not Jewish. How do you deal with these charges of anti-Semitism when you criticize Israel? I mean, we should be able to criticize another country and our own country. And we're seeing these charges leveled against candidates in New York City right now, in the New York City race. How do you deal with it when it's leveled against you, Sarahana? Sorry.
Okay, I'll go first. I deal with it by, first of all, like, ultimately, I don't care what people call me because people have called me everything, and that's just going to happen. Like, you don't even have, people will call Kamala Harris a communist, right? So it's totally out of control. But what I do focus on is having a conversation where I really try to paint why my position is so reasonable. I mean, the fact is, what happened to Jews, I don't want it to happen to anybody else, and that just happens to be a very popular position that does not have any ethical or logical holes in it. So not everybody will, of course, accept it at face value, but when I have canvassed and somebody has said, I agree with you on everything except this one thing, and when I have talked to them, one thing that does happen is they realize that I am not so horrible as they thought I was, because people also project their anxieties. And, I mean, ultimately, all of this hatred and division is coming through exploitation of people's anxieties and insecurities, right? And that is what is so dangerous about running about establishing a politics that comes with so many dead ends that actually doesn't do anything for people, is because it keeps that anxiety and insecurity alive, which is very much exploited by the powerful people to keep us divided and so on. Everybody knows that. But I've again, I have the advantage of having a district where I can repeatedly have conversation with my constituents. So I've just made two things important. One is that I don't concede, right? What I said, the day after October 7th is still my position, which was that when you respond, when you think you can solve all of these things by engaging in, these forever and very blatant wars, it's just going to perpetuate the cycle of violence. It's not doing something that people who disagree with me think that it's doing, and that hasn't changed. So I feel like I refuse to concede, but I also prioritize having very honest and reasonable conversations. And the fact is, I grew up in the global South. That is a whole different perspective that you gain by being born and raised in a country. I mean, most of my teenage years was spent under a civil war where very poor people took up arms because they had nothing, and it became very violent. Lots of innocent people died, lots of poor people were exploited by the party leadership, and so on. So it does give you a lot of perspective, because in the end, hardly any situation is so unique that your general values cannot be applied to that situation. A lot of these things have pretty much the same root problems and pretty much the same fallacies and so on. So I hope that by first not conceding and second winning an election despite not conceding gives us just a little bit of a footing to continue our fight, because that's what really needs to. And people were shocked that I won by so much, because they really thought, oh, she spoke on Israel and Palestine, that's it, she's done, But I think that's like, all of us are little foot soldiers of this movement, and we just need to take care of our whatever is in our capacity. And I think we'll get there together. I really do believe that ultimately, people have even changed their mind a lot, needless to say, in the last year or so.
Yeah,
I think you actually are very much making those connections that we're trying to make here between all of our ideals and the basic premise that every human life is precious, and we should all dedicate ourselves to basic human rights wherever those rights are threatened. So thank you for that. Yuh-Line, how do you deal with it?
I mean, I'm similarly to Sarahana, I've been called every name under the sun, and people criticize. If you're a woman and you're a woman of color, you get criticized for all kinds of things. You can, it doesn't matter how you look. You're gonna look at. They're gonna talk about your looks. If you look, it doesn't matter what you're doing. They're gonna talk about something that you're not doing. It's just all kinds of stuff. But I will say that also not true. Women definitely get more. I'm just gonna say that from whoever's in the chat. But I will say that it's really, really hard when it comes to not personalizing things for yourself, right? It is hard as a person, right? And that part is really, really hard. But I will say that it's important. It's important to, like Sarahana said, have the movement in your space, have the understanding, and talk to one another. And yeah, people will say things, but I think that the most important thing is to stay true to your convictions, and to also really be able to show through your actions and through the things that you're doing who you are. And that's really what it's about. And I think the people that care about you, the people who know you, they know who you are and what you're about. And I think that that's really important. And I think that when talking about being label a certain thing or whatever, a lot of times because of just how I look, people will say, I'm a communist, CCP, spy, even though I'm Taiwanese, just stuff that doesn't make any sense. And so, like, hey, you can't win them all. You can't, that's just not true. It's just, these things are just silly. But people will still say all kinds of things. People will say just, they tried to write an article. I think it was planted somewhere in Daily Beast. Somebody said something about how like my parents, because they're Chinese, they must be rich. They have like some secret hedge fund thing. I was like, what are you even talking? I wish I was rich, but you know, I am not. You know, and it was just such a strange thing. Like I was literally running against a multimillionaire heir of, you know, fortune, and yet this is what they wanted to attack me on, and like it just didn't make any sense. And so people will say all kinds of things to try to get you to change or to or just to humiliate you or to like try to make you feel like distracted or anything like that. But you know, it's a lot of noise, and it's also painful. I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because oftentimes like you don't deserve it. Like Jamal's one of like the best legislators that you could ever come across. Like you want your teachers and principals to run for office because they know how to change things for your kids. You know, they know how, like what legislation will impact people and change lives. And yet, you know, they took him for granted. You know, and I think that that's where we lose some of the best, right? Because we put we put people into impossible scenarios. But I will say this, I have friends like Seth, I have friends like you, Catherine, I have friends who've stood up for me, who are Jewish and have stood up for me. And, you know, I have people in the comments of like my, you know, social media feed when people call me these names and who will talk back and be like, that's just not true, you know, like this is just like these things. And so I think having the community around you, having people who will back you up, having your family and, you know, having the NYPAN family, like just be there for you makes a huge difference. So thank you to all of you for being there for us, right? And I think that I say that from my heart, and I know that Jamal feels it, I know Sarahana feels it, and I think that it's just something that means a lot to us.
I do think that maybe, although I think that Etan and Seth and I are pretty loud, but I do think that Jews need to get louder in our support of people who are not Jewish, who go out on a limb and try to fight for those people who are starving and being bombed in Gaza as we're speaking right now. So we just, need to keep that close to our heart. Did you have a question you wanted to ask, Etan?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to respond. I think to the discussion and to some of this thing, the stuff that Jamal touched on earlier is just that like when people pay the price in on campaign trails for taking positions, like those positions are pillars for political space later on for advocates. Like the people who watch these issues cling to the like leaders who step out there and put themselves at risk by holding on to their principles and standing on them and taking the storm and explaining it to voters like Sarahana had discussed. And like even like advocates get that too, like at NIAC, because we've always supported diplomacy first and opposed outside regime change, disastrous war, endless war on Iran, regardless of the political moment. We've gotten blowback. We've gotten accused of being regime apologists because we don't support an Israeli-led regime change. And I know Jewish activists get accused constantly of being Hamas sympathizers because they oppose genocide and ethnic cleansing and a deeply corrupt apartheid system, political system, not really a person. Not like people don't have a problem with Jews. So yeah, that. I wanted to like paint some of those parallels because even in these local elections, like the big issues in DC reflect those same bad faith, let's eliminate you from the conversation right away tactics. But because you die on that hill, you create the space for the next person, like for the next advocate to get in there. And it's important for people to be willing to sacrifice because our Democratic leaders, Schumer's and Jeffries, do not like some of the most risk-averse politicians of all time. Like, and people need to show a different kind of politics. Zoran's doing that, others are doing it, and it's more people need to do it. And on all levels, and on the right, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson, Candace, all these people who I would never find myself agreeing with are coming out with positions against endless war and Israel first policies in the Middle East, and that. I'll take it. I'll take it. Anyone, showing some free critical thought, taking a principled position that they can explain.
So I mean, I feel like all of us are talking at this terrible moment, ironically, about a politics of the future. And I love what you said, Sarahana, about avoiding the dead ends, because I feel that so many people in the media and more establishment politics are very caught up in the dead ends, you know, the things you can't do, the ways to say no, the ways to be afraid. And, you know, you and Yuh-Line, among political actors, are such wonderful examples of people who refuse those dead ends. And I do think, Yuh-Line, that your candidacy paved the way for Zoran's candidacy and other people who are running right now in the New York City race. But I want to talk about something that I know will interest Yuh-Line, the kind of campaign that Cuomo and to some degree Mayor Adams are trying to run, which is the politics of the past, it seems to me. And I'm getting the feeling that it isn't working as well as they expected it to. And I know that Sarahana's time is limited, so I'd like her to comment on that first. Do you think that the thing that they're trying to do is resonating in the way it might have been, say, 5 years ago or something?
That Cuomo is doing?
Cuomo is doing, yes.
Let's
pretend he's not Andrew Cuomo and we don't know all the other horrible things about him, just the kind of exploitative policies he's trying to push.
I mean, if he was not Andrew Cuomo, he would not even be polling.
Right.
He would, you know, he would be in the bottom of the bottom. I mean, the only reason he even has anything going for him is simply because he's Andrew Cuomo. But if he wasn't, I think his policies would be absolutely dead on arrival. I mean, you know, I always like to tell people that the last person who had a very successful campaign at a large scale is a person who ran on the platform of yes, we can. Nobody wins by saying we cannot do this, we cannot do that. We want people in leadership who don't care as much as about failure as much as about trying, right? We need people to try, because the truth is there are no conditions that are permanent. You know, these are all things that are changing. And even with the people who have run since Yuh-Line's time and the people who have, you know, like right now in the assembly, we have very exciting freshmen from all over the state, for example, you know, newer legislators. So the reality is the conditions are not set in stone. It's up to us how much we change them and how quickly, and that all depends on what kind of coalition we can build and how we are organizing, right? That's the thing about organizing, is there is no shortcut, and we just have to do the, you know, the one-to-one difficult conversations and the, you know, personal relationships with people and so on. But what Zoran, everything that Zoran is campaigning on are things people want, are things that are possible. As always, the obstacle is political will. We really don't have financial obstacles. We really don't have technological obstacles. What we have are a large group of people who agree to say this is not possible, when in reality, if everybody agreed it's possible, it is. You know, that's what we're working with. So I think that what, you know, Obama's campaign showed, you know, before he disappointed people, and what Trump's campaign win shows, is that people reject the status quo. How much clearer do we need this to be? And the thing is, if the left does not capture that sentiment, then the right will, which is exactly what's happening. It's insane to be in at a time when Trump has just won the popular vote, to be like, I wonder what people want. It's out there. What people want is for things to significantly change. What people want is for politics to be honest. I have met, you know, I have had Trump voters vote for me. And what the reason they vote for me is because I'm a normal person and I'm in front of the door and I'm honest. I say what I mean. The same thing I say in private is what I say in public. And that's what they like about Trump, unfortunately, you know, and they think Democrats are just show and dance and they don't really mean what they say. We need to live in the real world. If we live in the real world, it becomes very apparent what real people want, and we don't have to imagine what it feels like to buy eggs. We know it, right? So I think that in short, Cuomo's policies would tank him. Zoran's policies are, you know, have gotten him this far because that is exactly what people want.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, and I don't understand people who don't see this, that we are in a completely different moment. But you know, we love the people who do see it, Sarahana. So, um, uh, could you address this issue, Yuh-Line, of whether this old tired politics of are you going to visit Israel, etc., and all these things that Cuomo is trying to drag out? Do you think it's working as well as it might have in the past?
I mean, okay, so I don't think that it is, but I also don't discount it. I will say that. I think that there's a power of seniority, there's a power of, all these things, like when they tell you like this is how it's always been done, and then people have these expectations of, not having to break the rules, etc. But let me just kind of, first off say, Sarahana, I am so glad you're in office. You're amazing. I am proud of you. Like, you are amazing. And, when she first came on, I was so excited to have another young Asian woman who was going to be representing us, like literally South Asian woman, literally representing us in a place where people didn't even think we could get a Democrat. Okay. Like people literally didn't even think we could get a Democrat there, but we did. And it's because of her authenticity. And I think that that is something that is true. When she's talking about talking real talk, like it's about the authenticity. And I think that was one of the biggest, um, draws, I think, for folks like me, for others, people didn't even think I could take on this machine, right? And I think that the thing that I really remember about my very first race was how hard it was to break that like idea. It's a myth, but it's something that people believe so firmly that the myth became real, right? The idea that we couldn't break a machine, the idea that we couldn't infiltrate or change what Shelley Silver had built, right? And I think that, it was so ingrained in people that people were afraid to support me, because of the fact that it was so internalized. It just like with racism, just like with anything else, people internalize how power is built. And so I think it's one of those things that is needing to change. I will say when I really realized this the day we were talking about bathrooms in the Capitol. And I'm just going to say this as a short story, but it's something that's really important. So when I was in the legislature, when I was staffing Ron, I still remember when Neely Rosick was first elected, and that at that time, only 17% of the legislature was women. 17%. All right. And when I was elected, it wasn't that much more. It was 19%. I was the only Asian woman at the time because, Ron took Grace's seat. And then, it was like, I was the only Asian American woman. It was very lonely. This is the first time that we doubled the amount of Asian American representation in our entire state legislature. And on top of that, it was 2017. Like things shouldn't be like that. It was just really, really hard to kind of break that mold. And you couldn't believe it. It was the first time. And being a first and only is really, 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 really hard. And I'm just going to say that out loud because it's just the truth of the matter, right? And changing those percentages is tough. But Kathy Nolan, who we all know was like one of these long-standing legislators, one of the, she was like, she was alive, she like she was healthy and just like walking around the halls of the Capitol, and she was like, when I first started working here, when she was like, there weren't women's bathrooms in the Capitol building. I was like, oh my gosh, this is in our lifetime. And then I realized how short the political timeline is in actuality for all the progress that we have made, no matter how hard and horrible it feels. Like we feel like our government is going backwards in time. We feel like right now all these trad wives on TikTok are, telling us how to bake, like whatever. It's so weird, right? But at the same time, we know the progress that we have made by just that measure alone, right? We are talking about some of these issues and we are changing our minds, and people are, politically different, and we are making progress. And I will say that, the way that these men want you to think, the way that these traditional white men want you to think, the Cuomos of the world, the way that they want you to believe that it's still like wait your turn, seniority, like they never want it to be our turn. Okay. First and foremost, they never want things to change because it benefits them. And it is a myth. Everything is a myth. I used to not think that I could ever even touch government, right? But then I realized that it is that we can. And it's just these powerful people who want to stay in power, and they want you to believe that you can't make these changes, that you can't do these things, that you can't run for office, that we should self-select out. And it is just not true. Statistics have shown women have just as much chance of winning office as men, but we self-select out. People of color have just as much chance of winning office, but we self-select out. Like, we just can't do that anymore. And we just have to make sure that we are showing that authenticity and showing what we stand for. And, that is why Zoran's campaign's doing so well, to be, echoing what Sarahana said. But it is also why, I see Alexa on right now, and that's why Alexis won. Because I remember her coming to the Asian community and just being like, this is what I do. This is what's happening. And I was like, bravo, right? And I think that it's okay. We are humans and we can have those relationships, and that is what makes us good representatives, because we are reflective. We are reflective of our districts.
I'm so glad you noticed that Alexa is here. And Alexa, we've been talking about courageous, fierce women in particular, but we had a courageous, fierce man, Jamaal Bowman, on. I'm sorry that you missed him. And I can't think of anybody more courageous and fierce than you are. So I'm just going to briefly introduce you, and then I will ask you some questions. Alexa Aviles is a lifelong Brooklynite, a mom, and a fierce organizer for fully funded public schools, housing for all, and workers' rights. She won election in 2021 to represent District 38 in the City Council, and currently serves as the chair of the Immigration Committee. And of course, I can't think of a more relevant committee to be on at the moment. I have been admiring you from afar, Alexa, and I wanted to ask you a question that is important to me as someone who cares deeply about Palestinian rights. From my lights, I think there are deep connections between your principled stances on domestic issues, or what we call domestic issues, and the terrible crisis we're seeing in Gaza. So would you just comment briefly on what underlying principles are the basis of your positions on what we reductively call domestic and foreign policy issues?
Oh my goodness. First, I guess, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to participate tonight. I'm sorry I couldn't get here earlier, but thank you for the grace nonetheless. It's a good question. I think, honestly, what just undergirds it all is just a fundamental belief that all life is precious and all people deserve dignity no matter what. And this notion that there's an over there that doesn't seem to matter, that we can separate, is fundamentally false, right? We don't separate ourselves from our peoples around the world. We are intimately connected in so many different ways. And when I see families suffering, their suffering is ours. We are a collective, and it is, our responsibility certainly to hold that, to take accountability for it, and to try our best to do no harm at the very minimum, but certainly to uplift what is right and what is just for people, no matter how difficult that is. So I think that's what drives that connection to being principled, and to also worry about why we can't get sufficient garbage pickup on the block. It's all very much the same as the dignity of our people and making it work. And, I'm not sure I'm fully answering your question, but
No, I think that's a great answer for the question.
That's kind of what it is.
I think that the preciousness of every human life is the fundamental principle that we should all adhere to. So I think it's a great answer to the question. You have an opponent who is being financed by the pro-Israel lobby and other wealthy interests. How troublesome is that election challenge proving for you in terms of money and message.
Yeah, I mean, troublesome in not only, kind of the negativity that it brings, because that is a real thing, and my opponent seems to like that. So I guess birds of a feather flock together. I really don't like that. I think if anybody follows me, I think probably the only one I go hard after is, consistently, has certainly been Eric Adams. But it's been professional. It's been on policy. Yeah, I think it's hard to tell. I think that kind of negativity, honestly, I think permeates everything, right? It does the very thing that we are fighting against. Like, I am committed to building democracy, and then I tell my team, my staff, like, every person who walks in this door that we talk with, like, this is another grain of salt of rebuilding democracy, where we are helping people understand that this government can and should work for you, especially if you come from a marginalized community that has experienced government harm, intentional government harm at that. And so, it really is about building just a little bit of confidence. And these, awful folks who come in are seeding violence and seeding distrust, seeding a culture of like, yeah, we can lie and we can be negative. It's terrible, but I think there's a lot of private interests pouring into these council races. I mean, MSG, Uber, it's amazing. Solidarity
DoorDash.
Pack, like Remy, DoorDash. It's like, what is going on here? But it's clear that corporations want their people. They want to be unopposed. They want to have folks that rubber stamp them. They do not want to be questioned. And, they know I am not down with it. I'm here for the community. I'm not here to be friends, nor am I here to take, Lulus from corporations. I'm here for justice. And so, yeah.
You've made that clear, which is good. That's why a lot of people ardently support you. Since you mentioned Mayor Adams, I wanted to bring up something that he has just done, signing the executive order about the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which equates it with criticism of Israel. I mean, by those lights, Seth and Etan here and I are terrible anti-Semites, but what is inconvenient is that we're Jewish, like the members of JVP, and if not now, etc. I gather that he's going to send that to a vote to the council to see if it can be codified. Do you think that that is going to pass?
So, I mean, the minute he said it, of course, I was like on the horn, checking with folks. Both, number one, to educate some of my colleagues who really like they don't know, right? A lot of folks you would imagine they do, and even myself, right? I have to learn a lot, and thanks to many of my Jewish friends and non-Jewish friends who are really, informed, they are teaching me, and we've got to pay it forward. So certainly reaching out to folks to say, I want to have a conversation with you. We need to understand what this is. We need to understand the harms of this. And we create a safe space for people to ask questions, right? Because I think that's another thing. You get trapped into a corner and you're unable to ask, both because it's like terrorizing people for not knowing everything and not falling in line. So if I can help it, it certainly won't. I think I've gotten some pretty good feedback from folks that is not going to happen. And so I will continue to make sure that it isn't. It won't move forward. And so we're just doing the behind the scenes, organizing and informing folks that this is a terrible idea.
Are you seeing any effect on your colleagues of this incredible campaign that Zoran is running, both in terms of the amazing energy that we're seeing in the canvassing, and I'm doing phone banking with an incredible number of positive IDs, by the way, and the sensible, humane way he's talking about the issue of Israel-Palestine, applying basic principles to it. Is it moving the needle with people who may be more at a dead end?
It's in some ways I think people are really surprised, right? And a little bit like, oh crap. I didn't see that coming. I didn't see and it's true. He says, we have 34,000, volunteers. Like we've never seen this level of activation happen. When we handed in our petitions, right? I think Cuomo spent like $200,000 to get like, I don't know, 7,000 signatures. Zoran spent 0 and got like 50,000 signatures. Like, you can't look away from that stuff. And so I think certainly there are a group of people who are like, oh, wow, okay, maybe there is something there and I can't quite turn away. And also there's folks who are just desperately afraid of what does it mean to have someone who's going to bust through the status quo? He's going to bust through these party structures, bust through good old boys network, bust through, all of these things that people actually hide in safety with, right? Status quo is very safe for folks who don't want to do shit. Excuse my I know it's going to happen tonight. So, it's interesting though. I think people are starting to be like, oh, wow, this is a real thing. So I think, I don't know how many days we have left, but I think we're going to see obviously an increase in volume on attacks. The more they get afraid, the more they're going to attack and the more vicious they'll become.
Yeah.
But we are resilient and, more and more people keep coming out. So we say welcome.
Well,
So,
can I just make like a plug really quickly, Catherine? I'm so sorry because, we're talking about Zoran's campaign. Alexa has a very, very tough race as well. I wanted to just, her opponent is a very conservative Asian woman who is literally a TERF. Like she literally hates trans people. She's like sided with like Place. She sided with these like horrible Asian Wave Alliance people like Yating Chu. Like people probably know about them because of their like gross, disgusting affirmative action stance, like celebrating like the overturning of affirmative action, all these things. They are horrible. They are people who are MAGA, but I really need folks to help Alexa. Like I'm telling everybody here in NYPAN right now to really kind of help her with her race, because this is Iwen Chu lost her race. Okay, I'm just gonna put that out there. Iwen Chu lost her race. Lester Chang won in a Brooklyn district that is very, very, very Democratic, and he's a Republican, because there are people who are Asian voters who will literally see an Asian name on the ballot and be willing to vote for them, because they and it's about education. And again, Alexa, I'm here to help however you need me to, but I also want to ask NYPAN to really kind of stretch your neck out, stretch your fingers out, like stretch your organizing skills out. Right now we have a really crazy mayoral, but we have to keep our amazing council members in as well.
I think that for those of us who care about democracy and equality and the preciousness of each human life, this is the moment in New York City to come out for all of the people who are endangered. We don't have to say all of their names, but we know who they are, and including everybody on the city council who's endangered. And Maria, our amazing political director, has dropped the link in the chat to volunteer for you. And I can't imagine doing anything better with your time than volunteering for Alexa. So we will try to get people to come out for you.
She's the real deal, you guys. She's a real deal. Please help her. I know something about us, like especially when it comes to women who run for office, we have the hardest time asking for ourselves. We always are able to speak up for other people, but we have the hardest time asking for ourselves. And I know her race is hard. I know it because I hear it on WeChat, on all these other places. Like, I see it. I see the lies. I see the disgusting, like, folks posting really messed up things, like trying to take her down. Like, please, 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 please help her. This is the time to do it. And it's, just before early voting. And I know we run the risk. And
Yeah.
I've seen too many good electeds you know lose the opportunity to represent truly the district. She's so representative of her district. She's amazing, and we have to help her.
Well, we were looking for a way to transition at the end of this call into calls for action, and you two remarkable women gave us that way. So now we're going to transition into the calls for action. Please come out and support Alexa Aviles. She is really one of the best people in public office. And I just want to say, before I hand it to my colleague, Joe Sackman, that I think that we're looking in the New York City races at one of the most crucial races of my lifetime. And I think that if the progressives can show that there's another way for America, that there's a way of fighting for every human being, standing up to ICE, not just going to trainings, but really standing up to ICE, standing for the poor, beleaguered people in Gaza who are calling for our help every single day, standing against the faux anti-Semitism charges, standing against anti-Muslim bigotry and other kinds of bigotry. If every one of us can go flat out in the next 14 days, we can really change the trajectory of this country. And I know that may sound hyperbolic, but I actually believe it. So I'm going to thank you so much, Alexa and Yuh-Line. Yeah, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Yuh-Line. She's amazing. And one of the text messages I have to return, I promise I'll text you back. No, and thank you all. I mean, the stakes it's true. The stakes are incredibly high, and, they're focused on us because we present a deep threat to that right-wing agenda. And the truth is, in Brooklyn, I am I'm the border town there, where the electeds, with the exception of Justin Brennan, but all of the electeds that surround me, right, I'm kind of pushing back against this Republican wave that's taken over many of the communities.
That never should have happened, by the way. That
It
never should have
it
happened.
never should have
Yeah.
happened. And I do believe that we can build it back. Because it is clear that the interests of those folks are not the people, and not to improve their lives and to make sure that they are okay. And I think the people will see that, but there is a lot of misinformation. I think you keep people separate, divided, and hating each other. It's easy to control and manipulate folks. But I think we can build it back. And so the stakes are seriously high at this point. And I think if they see they can take us out, I think it'll be pouring gas on this fire that has been raging. And we're going to need to show them that they cannot. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lean. Thank Etan. Thanks, Seth. I've actually felt hopeful as I've been in this panel, and it's hard to find hope at the moment. So you guys really make me feel better. And I'm going to give it to an amazing activist, Joe Sackman now, who's going to give you your marching orders. Take it away, Joe.
Thanks, Catherine. And thanks, Yuh-Line. You did half my job. I have to go and promote Alexis anymore, but please go to Alexis' webpage, volunteer. She's endorsed by NYPAN, and we have other candidates we've endorsed. It's important to get out there and vote on January. I wish it was January. June 14th. Early voting starts, and we have Zoran and Brad Lander. We've endorsed both of them, but we also have a slate. It's important that it's ranked choice voting. So it's important that you fill every spot. Don't leave any blanks. and leave Cuomo out. You might be thinking, hey, you know what? I'll give him a chance at number 5. Not even. Don't do it. Leave him out entirely. You got lots of people to choose from. We're pushing for Zoran, Brad, and others. And, you know, with the Working Families Party, we're going to make sure that, you know, they've got opportunities to volunteer as well. Go out to the early voting sites, make sure people are hearing the word, and to get out there and not to leave any spots blank. Again, with ranked choice voting, the way this is like the second mayoral race we've had with ranked choice voting, and last time, well, we didn't do too well because we got Adams, right? So let's avoid that scenario. Let's make sure Cuomo doesn't get in, and we get the best candidate, which, you know, in my opinion, is Zoran. I'm not gonna get too emotional about it, but as Catherine has already said, there's lots of volunteering for that campaign. There's lots to happen. We've seen those polls, those numbers just shrink between him and Cuomo. It's unbelievable. That is a movement candidate. You know, New York, and this is the important part. How New York City goes is how the state will go. We have to remember that, right? Do we want to go back? Do we want to go back to Cuomo? Do we want further into status quo and establishment politics? The struggles that we all know we had under Cuomo, we don't want to see that in New York City. We want to see New York State move forward, especially in this time, fighting Trump and the authoritarianism. I hate using the word fascism because you think it's hyperbole, but it's not. We don't want to see what he's doing to LA happen in New York, right? Adams would gladly let him roll in. Zoran would stand up against that. So let's make a difference. Let's get out there and vote. Talk to your friends and neighbors. Make sure they voted. Make sure they don't vote for Cuomo. Saturday is no Kings rallies all over the nation. No Cuomo, no Kings. Zoran, Brad, and everyone else, 1 through 5. Get those votes in. I would tell you vote often, but you can't. But you do have 5 choices in ranked choice voting. So get out there. I think Maria has posted a link for some volunteering in the chat. Also, again, George made this ask earlier. If you like what we're bringing, become a member. Support us so we can keep doing this work, supporting these candidates, getting information about it. I saw a lot of people in the chat say, wow, I never knew this. This is important. They felt educated around this. That's an important part of what we do here at NYPAN, is provide education around the issues and what's going on that people just don't usually see from mass media. We go for the deep dive. So please support us if you can, and we'll see you in the streets.
Thank you all so much. This has really been an incredible forum, and you are all you're like Fannie Lou Hamer figures, and people know who that is. Nobody's free until everybody's free. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight.